Kenny.
Oh, Mr. Bill, you don't draw him like you used to. You and little Uncle Dave there.
Yeah.
Oh, we're
Uncle
just
Dave
coming
Bacon.
up on 12:30. Go ahead.
The Uncle Dave Bacon expert here.
Yeah, there was this, Bill used to say that when he traveled with Uncle Dave Macon,
In the 40s.
Uncle Dave would peek through the curtain and see a huge crowd, and he'd say, "Oh yeah, the old man can still pull them in."
That's
But if
perfect.
he looked through that curtain and there was hardly anybody there, he'd look at Monroe and say, "You don't draw him like you used to, Mr. Bill."
Oh my God.
Oh, one of many stories. Well, it is 12:30, and let's just say this is the beginning of celebrating Bluegrass Music Month, which is during the month of September, in which the International Bluegrass Music Association has its convention and its award show, now in Raleigh, North Carolina. But even more important, it is the birth date and the death date of the father of bluegrass music, Bill Monroe, during September. And it is such a thrill to have a bluegrass boy who was with Bill for so long. I mean, you run into bluegrass boys that may have been with him for a couple of months or something. But Tom Ewing, how many years were you with Bill?
10 years altogether, Bill.
10 years, and you were there to the very end of his career, I believe.
Yes, sir. From 86 to 96.
86 to 96. And he's picked up the term "yes, sir," which I think.
That's right, buddy. That's the only way to talk, I think. Yes, sir.
Tom, you are from the state of Ohio. In fact, your new album has a wonderful song that you've written in tribute to the
Thank you,
Buckeye
Bill.
State and your home. Tell us how you began in the world of bluegrass music as an Ohio resident.
Well, that's a good question. I've got a long, dull story for you here.
Good.
In the area where I grew up, Central Ohio, there wasn't that much bluegrass that I knew about. It was under the radar, so to speak, in bars, on the south side of Columbus. I never knew anything about that, but I was in a little folk group. I was interested in folk music back in the 60s, and I happened to get a record that it was a sampler record called New Folks. It had 3 or 4 different performers on it, and one of the performers was a group called the Greenbrier Boys.
Oh my.
And they played this wonderful stuff that I just could not believe. It was so beautiful, the way they played, performed, and sang. And I looked at the liner notes and was trying to figure out what I was hearing, and they credited a man named Bill Monroe, who I'd never heard of before. And that was the beginning of my interest in bluegrass music. I sought out Bill's records. At that time, they were not sold in record stores in Columbus. I had to go all the way to Cleveland to a hillbilly record store up there, Cleveland, Ohio. Found my first Bill Monroe record. It was all downhill from there, Bill.
So you went right to the father of bluegrass music from the Greenbrier Boys.
Yes, sir.
Ironically, the Greenbrier Boys was a New York City bluegrass group, and in fact, I had them on my radio show in 1959, and that was probably the first time that they ever did a radio show.
Originally, it was Ralph Rensler on mandolin, and Frank Wakefield came in later. I heard that mentioned in the group.
Right, and then
But-
Ralph Rensler wound up being the manager
for
of
Bill.
Monroe. Yeah. You didn't go down to Cincinnati to the Jimmy Skinner Music Center?
I should have done that. I didn't know any better. I had a friend who picked banjo who lived up in Bay Village in Cleveland, and he took me to this hillbilly record store. Man, everything in country and bluegrass that you could want to buy was right there in that store. Talk about a blind dog.
Your story is very surprising because I thought you were going to tell me that your family were Appalachians who moved up from up to southern Ohio.
I wish.
But you stumbled on it in a different way.
Yes, sir. Dad was a contemporary jazz fan. Loved Dizzy and Thelonious, and he encouraged me to love all kinds of music.
Well, that's
I'll
great.
say that.
That's great.
Wonderful man, and I really appreciate what he did for me.
Now, when you got into bluegrass music, at one point, I'll bet you either formed a band or was a member of a band.
Sure. Had several bands. One called Friends and Neighbors,
Friends and Neighbors, that's great.
and one we used the name that Bill called the key of B. He always called it B Natural, so we had the B Natural Boys for a while there.
So you kept going from band to band, and they probably got a little more famous and a little more famous. And
Yes, sir.
at what point did you leave Ohio and head down south?
Well, in 1974, that was a while ago, went down to Nashville and auditioned for Bill. And he didn't have his mandolin with him at the time. He was at his office. He had a pencil and he tapped on the table, the offbeat, while I sang. And yes, sir, that's fine right there. Do you know any hymns? Sang Build Me a Cabin in Glory Land, which is not really a hymn, but we sang it together, and boy, that was a thrill. And he said, well, I've got somebody else right now, but I'll call you. And he took my number, and sure enough, he did in '86, 12 years later.
10 years later.
12 years old.
12 years later. Well, he remembered you, though.
Yeah.
That's the
Bill Monroe had a fantastic memory.
Yeah, oh,
Yes.
Yeah. But the fact that you went down to Nashville and interviewed for Bill Monroe, how did you find out that he was looking for somebody, and how did you get in touch with him?
Oh, Bill, I kept track, you know. The word was out. The scuttlebutt, they call it. Yeah, you'd hear about it. If somebody left, if, for example, Ralph Lewis left at one point, and I heard about it the next day from a friend in Texas who I'd picked with someone in Ohio jamming. And, hey, Tom, you need to get a hold of Bill because Ralph Lewis has left. Now's your chance. So
I remember.
I got there too late, though.
Well, Ralph Lewis was a piece of work. He was really very, very funny, and you'd watch and see what he was getting away with. And I think the first year he was with Bill Monroe, Kenny Baker said, you keep being like that, you're not going to last long with the old man. But he lasted for quite a while.
Yes, he did.
And as you did, too. So you go down there and you start working as a bluegrass boy, and that was in 1986.
6.
Okay, you start in. It's like boot camp, right? I mean, you work for Bill Monroe. It's like going through Marine drills. So
Oh, yeah.
what was it like at the very beginning?
Oh, my God. I had no idea how Bill got from place to place. I really didn't know anything about that. It was totally green. As green as that gentleman's hat back there. As green as my hat. Really, didn't have a clue. Traveling on a bus? No way. Who ever heard of doing such a thing as that? So I had to learn to sleep on a bus with an engine roaring in the background. That took a while. Finally, in self-defense, I had to learn how to do it. And just stuff like that from the beginning, you know. Just using a microphone, for example, I would stand about 3 feet away from the microphone, and Blake would tell me, well, you need to get closer, damn it, so people can hear you. And the best advice I ever had early on, get in there, let them hear you.
Did you have to drive the bus?
I've driven the bus, yeah, but in those days when I was with Bill, they had pros.
Oh,
He would rent buses in those days when I was with him. And a driver came with the bus.
so you never were in the situation of leaving Bill behind, as he was at the rest stop in the bathroom, and all you boys continued on?
It's happened, yes. Yes, it's happened. We did that one time, yes, sir.